bring in our political panel to react to the big speech. Rebel Communications CEO Laura Fink, Cal Berkeley law professor John Yoo, and America First Policy Institute Executive Director Chad Wolf. Thanks to all of you for being with me tonight. Appreciate it. So there is, Chad, disagreement about who precisely President Biden was vilifying tonight. Take a quick listen.
What Joe Biden doesn't understand is that the soul of America is in the tens of millions of hardworking people, of loving families, of law-abiding citizens whom he vilified for simply wanting a stronger, safer, and more prosperous country.
Not every Republican, not even the majority of Republicans are MAGA Republicans. Not every Republican embraces their extreme ideology.
Chad, you were a political appointee under former President Trump. Who are MAGA Republicans?
Well, I think what the president's speech tonight really showed you is not only is he out of touch with the American people, he's out of touch with the reality. And so when he vilifies and attacks the Republican Party or those on the right and calls them a threat to democracy and then calls for unity at the end of a 20 or 25-minute speech, again, it just shows you how out of touch he is at the end of the day. And so I think what this shows that most Americans know is that when you can't defend your policies and when you don't have a record to run on, then you've got to scare individuals and you've got to scare the American people to come to your side. And I think that's what we saw today during this 25-minute speech, which was rambling and it was just all over the place. And I think most Americans kind of see through that. They see what that was, an overly political speech. And again, attacking half of Americans when he claims to be a unifier, and it's just not the case.
And Laura, our fact checker, has found that the president hit MAGA ideology 13 times in the speech. It was 25 minutes long. Karine Jean-Pierre insisted earlier today this was not going to be a political speech. Did she get bad information from the speechwriting office, or did she lie?
Well, I think what you see is a condemnation of political violence, a condemnation of insurrection, a condemnation of a philosophy that says if you don't win, you take to the streets to overturn it. And he said, you can't love your country only when you win. I think that's what this was really about. And it does unify the vast majority of Americans because the vast majority of Americans are not MAGA Republicans. And so he's trying to unite the country in the face of small d democracy being attacked, election results being undermined, the processes by which we verify our elections subject to partisan overturn. I think all of those things are really important to a broad swath of the American people, which the polling suggests tops even the cost of living, which we know is so important. But this preservation of democracy unites Republicans, independents, and Democrats across the board. If he is writing off those that would undermine democracy, those that would overturn elections, he has to do that to preserve the American process and the American democracy.
He still doesn't have the leeway to deliver political remarks during a primetime address to the nation as a sitting president on taxpayer dollars. John, take a look at this from Mark Thiessen today in the Washington Post. He says Biden is disgracing the institution of the primetime presidential address. For the sitting president to commandeer the institution of a primetime presidential address, one that's been employed by his predecessors to comfort the U.S. in tragedy, announce military action, and make the case for policy initiatives of great consequence and use it for partisan attacks is not a legitimate use of such a forum. What do you say?
Unfortunately, President Biden's speech reflects the way progressives actually treat our Constitution. The real threat here is to constitutional democracy, not just wild democracy like in ancient Athens or the French Revolution. Our country is a constitutional republic. And which party has been threatening the balance of powers of that Constitution? Which party, for example, is transferring $500 billion to maybe $1 trillion by executive order, which tried to impose a vaccine on unwilling Americans, which tried to ban evictions of landlords, all losing at the Supreme Court? Which party wants to pack the Supreme Court? Which party wants to change the balance of the Senate by adding the District of Columbia as a state? I think progressives always have been frustrated by the limits of a constitutional republic like the kind we have, and it's not Republicans who are the threat to it.
On that note, Chad, let's switch gears real quick and talk about the criminal investigation into the former president. All indications from the DOJ now look like they are going to make a case against him for obstruction of justice. Today, Judge Cannon declined to appoint a special master. She very well may do that at any moment now going forward, but she didn't do it from the bench today. What do you read into that about where this is headed?
Well, I think we need to wait and see what she eventually rules on at the end of the day. But I think most Americans want to see that third party. I don't know that they have the trust in the equal application of justice here, particularly when it comes to the FBI. And so I think it's only fitting. I think it's appropriate to have that third party review, particularly in such a high profile event that we're talking about here. When you have the FBI and the levels of government going after a former president, I'm not really sure how the other side can really say it's not appropriate to have a third party look at that. So hopefully that's where it will end up at the end of the day.
Laura, Andy McCarthy in the New York Post today said that going the obstruction route may be a clearer path forward for the Department of Justice. What do you make of that?
Well, Jillian, we don't have the evidence. What we do see, though, at least in this case, is that the facts and the law don't appear to be on Trump's side. We know he's great at PR. He's great at trying to strike on the airwaves, but his lawyers are having a really hard time, so they are resorting to delay tactics like the special master, which may get them a delay, but they do not dispute the facts that the DOJ included in their submission to the judge. They do not dispute the precedent and the law that allows for this search in these extreme circumstances where highly confidential documents, where state secrets, where intelligence sources and human beings who collected that intelligence are in danger. And so I think that the stakes are incredibly high, and we're seeing the institutions go through the process to protect that, even in the face of a former president and these documents being in a public space.
John, do you think that the obstruction charge, if it is levied against the president, would be easier or at least more straightforward for the DOJ to prove?
No, as a former Justice Department official, I don't think this is the kind of case would bring. It'd be very difficult to prove that President Trump himself was obstructing investigation. It could be the lawyers that are representing Trump and are dealing with the FBI and the archives throughout this whole process. I'm not saying they're guilty. It's just hard to prove. That's why I think what's really at stake here is not whether the search was legal or whether there are violations of the statute saying you can't take away government papers. The FBI pictures from yesterday bear out that the facts are there. The question is, should the government use its prosecutorial discretion to go after a former president for the first time ever in our history, charge him with a federal crime, and try to put him in jail for mishandling classified information? There may be a case about January 6th. I think that's what this is really about, is both sides are trying to play tough to actually set precedents and set the ground rules for what's going to be coming in the months ahead, which is searches for January 6th investigations, not over classified documents.
Panel, we got to leave it there. Thanks for staying up late with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jillian.